All right, guys. So, about a month ago, a subscriber who goes by the name of Cryptid from Pluto painted me a beautiful Sasquatch painting. And I really encourage this lady to pursue and possibly open a web store. Hopefully, she does soon. A lot of you guys were interested in the Sasquatch picture that she painted, which is right above my head, right there. I really suck at doing this. Right there. Um, she sent me another painting today, and it is probably my favorite thing in my studio right now. This is my new painting from Cryptids from Pluto, and as you guys know, it is the logo from the channel, and it is awesome. So awesome. I am blown away and blessed. Guys, when she opens her web store, I will share the link, and I really hope that she does it soon because her paintings are just killer. Thank you so much. Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. We are going to revisit Victor's very first hunt that he shared with us, the Little America, Wyoming hunt. Before we get into that, though, a couple links I'd like to share. As you know, I rely on my Patreon, my PayPal, and my merch store to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Those links are in the description below. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook version. They were written by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. They're available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, and the links on those are in the description as well. Now, everyone, I've taken enough of your time. Let's get on with today's upload. Shall we? January 3rd, 1991, Little America, Wyoming. I walked into the office, and it was a different feeling around the room as all the agents had attended my father's funeral on December 23rd, 1990. Some had even served as his pallbearers, but it was time to get our butts back to work. There was nothing that we could do for him. He had told me the day he had died that he loved me, and before I could even speak back to him, he was gone. It was like he knew it was his time to go, and there was nothing left but to say goodbye. Anyway, the CO was handing out cases that needed to be worked, and he had decided to keep me in the office for a few more days, just to keep me close. And I asked if he could please send me somewhere as to get my mind off of everything that had just happened. He had already assigned 2 of the 3 cases he had and only had the Wyoming case left, and said that I would need snow skis and snowshoes for the case, and that I did not have any. So I told him that I would go and buy some and anything else that I needed for the job, just to get me out of the office for a few days. He finally agreed, and I was packed up and ready to go. I received the file. Some extra agents were sitting around at the time, and he was going to send an extra agent with each of us when we left. I disagreed with him, that mine was a one-man job, and I finally just told him I needed some time to be alone, and he was fine with that. My case was a lady who had gone missing from Little America gas station and had been missing for 4 days. Now, and that 2 men had seen her being taken by a creature that was about 7 feet tall, weighed probably 300 pounds, had a bushy tail and a long nose. So the very next morning I fly out and stop in by the county sheriff's office and have a talk with the sheriff to see what he has to say. He tells me that both witnesses had been drinking prior to his officers arriving, and by the time that his deputies arrived to take down the statements, that when they arrived and when they looked at their footsteps at where they ended, there were no return footprints, and the only tracks leading away looked like large canine, but it almost appeared like it was walking on the tips of its toes. is how the deputies said it appeared. They radioed in and asked if he would be able to come to the scene with them. He told them that he was already on his way to their location and to keep everyone else from walking in the area. When he arrived, he was led by one of the deputies to the area. He had gotten a good look around and by himself followed those tracks maybe a half a mile, and there was never a sign that the woman was put down. The snow was getting deeper, and he had no snowshoes to travel any further. So he returned to the original scene and asked if anything else was found. He then went up and questioned Cody, the man that was in charge of taking care of the gas station, and asked what he had seen. He explained to the sheriff that himself and Alan had stepped out back to smoke and that there were several people around and the sun was up and very bright. Customers were speaking back and forth to them and to each other when Alan drew his attention to a woman standing way off in the distance. Nothing wrong with her being out where she was. Thought she may be walking her dog or something. Anyway, they were about to go back inside when Cody takes one more look toward the lady standing in the field when this thing rises up maybe 15 yards behind her. It's 2 feet taller than she was. We both started hollering at her, trying to get her attention, when other customers see it and also start to scream at her. And at the very last minute, she turns right into its arms of the thing, and it turns and starts moving away with her like a jogging pace, not running, but not walking either. Alan and another customer took off after this thing, and by the time they got to where it had picked her up, they could no longer see it, so they turned around and came straight back to the back side of the station. So I asked the sheriff if they had a room for me to interview the 2 witnesses, and he replied he'd be glad to help out and I could use his office, but that would be no problem. He and his department would help any way they could with this case. I asked about where I could get a good pair of snowshoes. He called in a deputy named Lisa, and she asked what size shoe I wore and how much money I wanted to spend. I told her that I wanted the best pair the store had, and as I reached for my wallet, the sheriff said that the bill would be on his office. It was okay. Everything was fine. He had asked me about warm coats and pants, and I showed them what I had got. He instructed Lisa to get more stuff that I needed to survive out in the wilds of Wyoming, the cold nights, that my clothing I had brought would not keep me warm. Told me to bring me to his house, that I was going to be his guest until morning. I tried to refuse, but he said everything else was full, and that I needed to be rested before I start out on this trek. And he needed to get a couple of his officers ready to go with me. I then explained that I needed to do this on my own, and that I could not take any others with me and endanger them, as I was not 100% sure what I was dealing with, which was a fabrication, but I would know for sure the following day. The next morning came early for me, as I always got up fairly early, 4 in the morning, and I'm ready to go to the station. I've read this report so many times I can tell you word for word and don't need to look at it. Finally, Lisa comes dragging into the sheriff's house at around 5 and asks how long I've been up, and that she and one other deputy are ready to go whenever I am, and that all my new equipment is in the sheriff's office waiting for me to arrive. When I get to the office, Lisa has done very well outfitting me with new clothes and things that I needed for the field. I changed, thanked her for how it fit, and made a statement that her husband has really made with someone like her taking care of him. That was a mistake I made. Her husband had been killed 2 years earlier in a car accident. Something ran out in front of him and hit a telephone pole, trying to miss it, cut the pole into almost half, somehow, through his body around 45 feet from the car. He was dead on the scene. She passed it off, and we moved on with the day. The first gentleman coming in this morning would be interviewed was Alan. He arrived at roughly 0800, just like he was supposed to, not a minute early. I take him to the sheriff's office to talk with him, and here's Lisa sitting in the corner with a pad and pencil. I ask what she's doing. She says that I will need someone to take notes like the sheriff does, right? I tell her that will be just fine, so I introduce myself to him and ask if he remembers January 3rd, 1991, and where he was that morning. He replies that he was at the Little American fuel station, talking with one of his friends. That he had been there since about 0300. I asked why he arrived so early. He stated that his friend had some white whiskey, and they were going to drink it while his friend cleaned up the place. So while Cody cleaned and drank, he sat around and watched his friend work. Alan was a fairly lazy type of person and still lived with his parents at the house. He said after the station had opened that he stayed close to the back door, where he could get outside if the owners came in, and checked on Cody to make sure he was doing his job correctly. Said that Cody finally got a break and they both stepped out back for a smoke. That it was a very sunny morning and everyone was in a good mood. There were customers all around the backside of the station as well as the front when Cody noticed this woman had walked out into the field behind the station and mentioned it to him. He looked up and saw her, but there was nothing wrong with her being back there. There was nothing she could get hurt on. We finished our smokes and we were getting ready to go back inside when Cody took another look at the lady in the field and saw this thing walking up to her from behind. Once again, he brings it to my attention also, and this thing has to be at least 2.5 feet taller than the woman. So we start yelling, trying to get her attention. She must be 150 yards away. Some customers hear us yelling and see what we're yelling about, and they start yelling as well. She finally hears us and turns, but it's right into the arms of this thing. Looks like it just picks her up and turns the other way and starts to jog away with her. Myself and another customer take off in a dead run, hollering as we go. And by the time we get to the place that she had been standing, when this whatever grabbed her, was no sign. Then we just stopped right there. We stood, caught our breath, looked around for tracks. They appeared to be large canine, but looked different. We then returned to the station and the law was called. There were several people standing in the back looking, but there was nothing new to see. I asked if the drink could have had any effect on what they saw take her. He said no, that he could plainly see that it had a snout and a bushy tail, and its height of this thing was at least 7 feet. His friend Cody is sitting in the next room now, and Alan has told me about everything he can, and that he remembers, or at least he says he remembers. He also adds that it was about 4 to 5 inches of snow on the ground at the time, but that they probably had much more than that since this took place, so the tracks would probably be covered up, and it would take a good tracker to follow those tracks now. So I think Alan cut him loose, but I didn't want him to speak to Cody on the way out. So Lisa gets another deputy to come in and take Alan out the other way. I thank Lisa for this. I'm going to take a break before I speak with Cody. I finish going to the washroom, come back, sit down. Lisa brings in Cody. I introduce myself to him and tell him why I'm here and ask him what he can tell me about what and when went on the station of the morning of January 3rd, 1991, and to give me as much detail as he can. So the first question I ask is, do you think your drinking had any part of what you're going to tell me? Looks like he takes offense to me trying to ask him if he was drinking on the job or something. He also says I'm trying to cost him his job, and that me saying Alan was in the building while he was cleaning is another way of me trying to get him fired. So I set him straight right there and then and say, hey, if I want to get you fired, all I'll do is concoct some kind of storyline, include him in it, and he would be gone, so he needed to get on the same page as me and help me, not fight against me on this, and let's just get this interview over. So he looks like he's settled into his seat now and ready to go. I ask just, if he could just tell me what he saw and what happened on the morning and be detailed, if something really stands out to you. But start from the very first thing that morning, okay? He says, okay. Takes a deep breath and starts. He says that Alan called him about 2:30 in the morning and told him he had some white whiskey and if he wanted to meet me at work and hang out for a while I clean up and drink some. I'm not sure what time he showed up, but he did show up, and all he did the whole time was sit and watch. Anyway, it's time to open. I tell him to stay close to the back door in case the owners come, as they know him and we are close friends, and if he sees them to exit through the back door. Finally, I have given everyone a break and go outside and smoke. While we're standing there, I spot the woman maybe 100 yards in the back field just standing there, and I point it out to Alan. He asks if she's okay, and there's nothing out there for her to get hurt on, so we continue to talk and finish our cigarette. It's about time to go back in. I take one last look at the woman in the field and see what appears to be a large dog about 2 feet taller than her, but it appears to be coming to her. Then the dog stands up on its hind legs and starts walking directly at her. I nudge Alan and tell him to take a look. We're both in shock at what we are seeing and start screaming at the woman, as do some customers that see what's going on as well. After a few seconds, she looks our way, and then she turns, and there is this thing right in front of her. I think it bit her in the throat right then, but I'm not sure, but her body went limp. Then it kind of just picked her up and took off with her. It had a tail on it, and it was pretty huge. One customer and Alan went running after them both, but said that when they got to the spot where they both were standing, that they could no longer see them in the open field anywhere at all. And it's all open space. So I stop him for a minute and ask him, "Are you sure you saw it bite her?" And he replies, "Yes, he did." And I tell him to go on with his telling of what happened. He said that when Alan went after this thing, he went inside and called the police and told them that a woman had just been abducted from the station. They kept on asking Cody for a description of the man, and Cody said he didn't have a description and that the people were still out back that had seen it happen. And he was dragging her towards the mountains behind the station to hurry. When they showed up, they walked the deputies to the spot of the abduction and showed them the tracks. That's when the deputies called the sheriff and cleared the area. One more thing, then we're done, Cody. You said that you and Alan and all the deputies and the sheriff walked right out there. He said yes. I asked if there was blood on the ground, like a pool of blood, and blood leading away from there. He answered me again with a yes. I thanked him and told him he could go, and asked Lisa to close the door for a minute. I asked her how well she knows the sheriff. She's worked for him for 5.5 years, and as far as she knows, he's a good man. I then asked her to look at a file before I head into the field. She studies it for a few minutes, and I ask her what's wrong with this file, and she has not figured it out. I ask her to bring the sheriff in. I need to ask him a question. She brings the Sheriff Moorhead in, and he wants to know what this is all about. He has already told me everything he knows, and has also given me the complete file. I throw the file at him and ask him to look at it and tell me what's missing. He looks at me, and then he looks at his deputy and asks her to leave the room now, please. Lisa stands and starts to leave the room. I tell her to sit down, so that she needs to hear what her sheriff has to say. And he shoots me a look that would kill. I tell him to go ahead and tell me what's missing first, and make sure he doesn't leave anything out. Also, to say it loud enough for both of us to hear. He sighs and says the original pictures were taken. I ask how many there were missing. He comes back that 9 were destroyed. And what did these photos show? They showed a huge pool of blood that we destroyed and didn't want anyone else to walk out and find. if someone else walked out there like our lady friend did. I agree that the area needed to be cleaned up, but why no pictures? I needed to know what I'm working against, for one thing, and that it's already killed makes it even worse for me. I then ask if I may have one of the radios so I could get in touch with them if I need. He said he had 2 deputies ready to go with me, and I told him that I hunt alone, but thank you for your kind offer. I ask how far it is to that station, and he says around 35 miles. I then asked for a ride, and Lisa said she would take me out, as she was one of the deputies that was supposed to go with me anyway, and the sheriff said that would be fine and apologized to me before I left. Said he never thought anything would come of the case. So now it's time for me to hunt down this Dogman and see if I can locate this woman's body and recover it. Also, the sheriff asks me, as I'm leaving, if I need to wait another night, as it's after lunch now, and bad winter storm is rolling in, and I will be caught out in the open if I don't make it to the rock fields by dark. And that's a good 14-mile hike, he says, I'm guessing. He also offers one more time to have his officers go with me, but I can't put them in danger. We loaded up my pack, and Lisa gave me 4 extra charged batteries just in case, not knowing how many days that I will be out, and she starts driving us to Little America Station. We talk on the way there, and if I was going to take someone with me, that it would be Lisa. But the reason why we have no female agents is on the account of that time of month rolls around, and that draws the creatures into the females. We have had 3 female agents and lost all 3 to one of the big 3 on count of them having to deal with that time of the month. We get almost to the station, and I get her to put me out before we get to the station. I test the radio, and all is well. I put on my pack and head into the wilds of Wyoming. She pointed out a point on the distance mountains and said that there is another road up there. It's probably 45 miles or so, and that she will ride up there each day and down each day to try to make contact with me just to check in. I told her not to worry if she doesn't hear from me for up to 4 to 5 days, that I will be fine, that I may not be in radio range for the handheld. And she said that she had not been anywhere in this county that she couldn't reach the office from the handheld. I told her I would try at around 1400 every day. It was already snowing when we parted ways, and she said when it started to get hard to walk in my boots, to put the snowshoes on, it would help tremendously. I had walked what I thought was probably 8 miles, and it was so overcast and getting dark that I knew I was never going to make it to the rock outcroppings the sheriff was talking about before it was too dark. I was going to be out in the wide open, and I already could not longer see the mountain Lisa told me to travel towards. I was warm, and I was not worried about anything except for the weather. Should I stop and set up my 2-man person tent and go inside till morning and see what that brings? Should I keep on and try to get to the rock outcroppings and some shelter from the wind and snow? So me being me, I push on for another 2 hours, reach the rock outcroppings. Like the sheriff said, they would be there. I was walking down in between the rocks and finally found a very level and tight area out of the wind. It was still getting snow, but it was not getting any wind, and there was what I was looking for. So I dropped my pack and started to get everything set. I had set my rifle down next to my pack and had stepped away to let my bladder do its thing, and was moving back to where I planned to set up my tent for the rest of the night. I looked at my watch. It was 2200 when I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I had drawn my .45 caliber Colt Government and stayed still for a minute, listening for anything and looking for any more movement, but there was nothing but wind, and I could only see between these 4 or 5 rocks that I was settling between. I did wait a good 15 to 20 minutes, then I put my pistol back away. I started to open my pack when it landed on my back. I had no chance to draw my pistol or even reach for my rifle. I'd heard nothing, but I knew it had come from the tops of the rocks, and had landed like it weighed hundreds of pounds. But what hurt the most was when it took its nails down the sides of my neck and upper back and just cracked me 3, maybe 4 times, I'm uncertain. I know I couldn't even fight back at all. I couldn't throw a punch, anything for any offense. For the next 10 to 12 minutes it tossed me like I was some kind of toy ball, bouncing me off the rocks. It had torn my coat, my vest, and my shirt, my undershirt, all the way. It had ripped my upper right leg, and then it finally got tired of tossing me like a rag doll, and I guess it just walked away as far as I could tell. I was lying there bleeding from my leg and from my neck and back, and I was cold. I just said my final prayer because here I was 14 to 15 miles from anywhere, and the snow was increasing. I couldn't move. I was thinking about my wife, my boys, and how I would never get to see them again, and that my wife was going to have to raise them all by themselves. I've had so much blood that came out of my neck. It's all in my eyes and I couldn't see. And I'm thinking this is going to be my final resting place. As I lie there with everything running through my mind, I don't realize I'm getting colder, losing more blood, and starting to go to sleep. I don't know how long I was able to remain awake, but I was fighting as hard as I could to stay awake. I was trying to move so I could find my pack and try to get something out to put on and maybe help me stay warm. I was even trying to see what was torn off of me to try to wrap it back around me. Anything would help, but I couldn't see anything. Then I thought to myself, in all that time I was getting tossed from side to side, that I surely must have been thrown from between where I originally had started from. I tried with everything I had inside of me to move, and I collapsed to the ground one last time. I lie there for a few minutes, resting, giving my arms and legs and everything I had time to get it together. I tried to get on my hands and knees, but it was no use. I could not longer raise myself up, and the snow was coming down faster. And man, I was cold, but what I could possibly do was try to find my pack, find the shortwave handheld, and hope that I could raise somebody during that night. But I was unable to move, let alone find my pack. I was lying there struggling, trying to move, and the cold has taken its toll on me. And my mind was racing to my wife Ellen, my boys Scott, Randy, Bobby, Joey, William. And things I would like to say to them are be able to write down things for them to read, but no, it's not going to work out this way. But at least I had fixed it so each would be able to retire when I passed, as I had taken out extra insurance that I was paying for just to make sure in case something ever happened. I don't know what time it had turned to now, but I was covered in snow, and at that moment, that was the last thing I remembered. It was lights out, no more thoughts for me. It had to be hours later, and I felt something tug on me. Don't know what it was, didn't really care. I was back out again. I woke up one more time for a brief fleeting moment, and I was being carried away by something. My eyes froze shut and didn't open until I couldn't tell you when. The next thing that I do remember was a voice saying he was going to find me something to wear, and I felt like I was in a dry, but that was it. My next memory was waking up with something on each side of me, licking at my wounds, and Lord, did it feel good. I stayed awake for a good 30 minutes or so, but I was so cold I knew I was freezing to death. But that continued licking, and I finally fell back to sleep. I woke up, and just as warm as I could be, my eyes had been cleared so I could see, and wasn't about to wake whatever it was that had warmed me up. I was not going to wake it up. I had one in front and one in the back of me. I knew it was furry, and when I looked, I knew it was 2 female werewolves. They had licked my wounds clean, and after that, they had seen how really cold I was and positioned their larger bodies and took care of me by using their body heat and fur. Each one got on either side of me and wrapped their bodies around me to keep me warm. After much time, the 3rd werewolf returned, and he was a young werewolf along with the 2 females. He had returned to the far north side of where I was heading. He returned with my coat, 2 shirts, and surprisingly they fit. I was able to sit up, put them on, and speak with them, and they were fascinating. That I would converse with them, they found it to be a very peaceful experience. The young male returned the next day, found my pistol, my rifle, my pack, and brought them to me. The 2 females had been sleeping up against me at night because I did not have my sleeping bag till that night. That was fixing to come, which will be the 3rd night in a row for them to be with me, I think. After he brought my pack, I shared what food I had with them. He said he would get us some fresh meat, but that we needed to be careful that the very large werewolf that attacked me was within 5 to 7 miles of us, and he would not be able to fight it off if it came around. So I checked my rifle and told him that we could take turns watching for that thing and that I would kill it. I asked how long they had been in the area, and they had been here for a couple of years, that the game was plentiful. The only problem was this new werewolf was in the area and he knew he could not fight him. I asked about the 7-foot Dogman, and he said yes to that as well. Said it had killed a lady a few days back, and he didn't have any clue why he did it. It was uncalled for. But that it was holed up maybe 3 miles from here in a cave, and that there was a group of 6 or 7 men that went after it the same day the Dogman took the lady, but they didn't find him or have a tracker that could follow the tracks. So now the weather still had not broke. He went back and found my snowshoes, and I was looking forward to sleeping inside of my sleeping bag. I told them that I had a 4-person tent I just carried in case I ran into somebody who needed it, and we could set it up if they wanted to sleep inside, and I would just use the 2-man tent. And one of the females said we could all fit in the 4-man tent, so I wouldn't argue with that. She could do math. Anyway, I set the tent up, and they told me to get comfortable on the account of my wounds, and if there was not enough room, we could set up the other tent. And I would have to do it because they couldn't because of their long claws, but I placed the sleeping bag where I wanted, and I went to bed. The others came to bed at different times. The young male came in last and sat at the open door all night long, and kept a very keen eye over the rest of us. I don't know exactly when, but the one called Nicole climbed inside the sleeping bag with me during the night sometime. Her fur was soft and warm, and she had never had any comforts like that before in her life. Should have seen her face the next morning telling Courtney about it. I asked which road was closer, and the young male said going due north was going to be a little shorter, and he had killed us a yearling buck. I dressed it, but that wore me out, and we built a small fire. I learned the young male how to build a fire, and I cooked up the front shoulder so we would have enough for the next couple of days, and I told them to eat what they wanted, that if game was plentiful, as he said, I could take another buck down with my rifle and not to worry with the Dogman and werewolf, that we could both kill them, and there was nothing they could do against me or my rifle, and me killing them, there was absolutely nothing at all they could do. So the very next morning, I hobbled away from camp just about sunrise and found a good spot. Sat down as the sun came up, and so did the deer and another spike buck. One shot, one killed, just about 375 yards, and here came my young friend, the young werewolf. And he stopped right beside me, knelt down, and said to be quiet for a minute, and pointed to my far left about 650 yards out. Here came the Dogman, nose in the air and moving fast. He already had the nose for the dead deer, and I tell him that just as soon as he reaches the dead deer, I'm going to put a round through his head. And we both get as low as we can and still keep the Dogman in sight. I nudge the young werewolf and point to the right, and here comes the large werewolf, the one that had tried to make me into a short order meal for someone, but I don't know who I am. And then I figure he's coming back to make sure that I died from my wounds he inflicted on me the other night, and that I was turning my attention toward the werewolf. The young one was watching and getting a little anxious at what was going on, and I was starting to get nervous as to what was going on fixing to happen when all of this took place, and I was not reading between the lines very good. I had shifted my gun toward the werewolf, and now the werewolf had my full attention, and my left hand held my .45 caliber Colt Government, but the young werewolf couldn't see it. And I was thinking to myself, where were the two females at? And about that time Nicole put her hand on my shoulder and said I needed to come with her now. I turned my head a little to look at her. She was nodding her head and said yes quietly, as if she didn't want him to hear her saying it. And Courtney was ducked down another 10 yards behind him, also nodding. I told him I was pulling back, and he said to stay low, and that he would catch up when he could. We returned, got my pack, and took out everything we would need, and started to swing around them all, and that they would still cross in front of me and stay in front of me except for the Dogman, and he would stay behind me. The trap was laid, and the two females were saving my life once again, and I was telling them thank you without him knowing about it, and hoping they would not turn me in to him again. It was just a game of wait and see, and no one knew the outcome. If the guys knew, they certainly were not letting on one bit, which I couldn't show any boldness or I would be had. If the girls showed anything, it could be bad for them. Also, everyone had something to lose one way or another, so we all had to play our own hands correctly. So as moved out, I took one last look at the Dogman was down crawling toward the deer carcass, which meant he had probably seen the werewolf and was going to try to scare him away from the deer. But that was not going to be easy. As I could tell, the Dogman was not as big as the werewolf was as they inched closer. I wanted to watch, but the two females were telling me no, we had to go. So on we went over the rise, and out of sight moments later, two very distinct howls go out, and we know it's on. And you can just tell that the Dogman is already in trouble and possibly has fled the area with the werewolf not far behind. Courtney says we don't need to slow down for a while and stay to our right so the bigger werewolf will not cross our path. Then once again the snow sets in on us, and the females are hoping that he doesn't go back and check the location where he jumped me, unless he continues back toward the station the way I had come from to see if I went back that way. We had probably went a mile and a half, and both sets of females' ears perked up. They look behind us. The look on their face says there's something wrong, and it's not a good feeling. By the appearance on their faces, they both look like they have seen a ghost. I tell them I don't know how much longer I can keep traveling, as my right leg feels like it's going to fall off. About the same time their ears perk up again, I ask them to tell me what's going on, what's happening, to make them act that way. They are acting, and what they are hearing. Nicole looks at Courtney and then at me and says about the same thing the large werewolf has evidently killed the Dogman, and he is howling in delight. I asked how they knew this, and how that normally they would never fight one another. Nicole said this large werewolf is like it has rabies or something, and that it's going to take an awful lot to take him down. That is why their partner says what he was saying. He had rather tried to outrun him as to try to fight him because of the way he's acting toward everything. After he found you more times than not, he would have left you to die and not interfered with your dying, and you were very close to it when he dug you out of the snow. He told us not to touch you, where we would not get your scent on our fur, but we went against him on that evening when we went to find you something to put on. He was scared to go back after your pack, fearing you would be watching the area for your return. If you were no longer there, or if someone had found you and taken your body to shelter, like he did, then come back for your things. When he returned and saw us curled around you, he knew that we were all in this together now, and if he had to cross paths with the larger werewolf, he knew he couldn't win the fight due to the size and strength. So the reason he was staying behind was to try to draw him away from this direction, and he will sound as loud as he can if and when he has to cross paths. And maybe, just maybe, we will hear it, and you must push yourself as far as you can, but when you can't go any further, to lie down and rest. One of us will take turns watching and listening all the time you are resting. I replied back that I did, and they asked, how much more do you think I was able to go before I totally shut down? I replied maybe a mile if I was lucky, and that I would really push myself. We would give it all we had. So for the next hour and a half I crawled and was led on either side by the female guides, trying to get to the road. I was thinking only about getting to that road, unable to raise anybody on the walkie-talkie now, just no one hearing me at all. I finally collapsed, and they both looked at me, and I just couldn't get a read on what they were seeing in their eyes. Was it pity? Was it disgust? What was it? I wasn't sure what I was seeing. I could travel on, and I was wishing that the young male was here with us, but he wasn't. I rested for about 20 minutes just lying in the snow, and Nicole said, we must get your tent up and protect you from the snow and get you out of the weather. I rised up and pulled out the 2-man tent and sat in it, and set it up, not realizing what I had done, and neither one said anything to me about it. As it was done, when I finished, I climbed inside. Courtney climbed inside and said Nicole would be in 2 hours, but before Courtney had climbed inside the bag with me and actually went to sleep before I did. Her fur was that of like Nicole's, soft and warm. When it came time to change out, Courtney was still sleeping hard at it, and I let Nicole get in the bag with her. It was not 5 to 8 minutes when she was asleep, and I was watching the doorway. Then finally I had the nods so bad that I had to wake Courtney up, and in doing so, I woke both of them up in my talking. Both said to hush. There was a movement outside of the tent. I told them to lie down and point toward the movement just as soon as each heard it. So I'm listening and watching their hands, and they point straight out the door. And it's open flat, as maybe 100 yards, and I ask how far they can hear with the wind and snow going like this. They whisper a good ways, but I can see nothing at this time. When here comes the young werewolf, and he says, we have to get moving, that the larger one is probably tracking him by now, after he was seen when he witnessed him kill the Dogman. Once again, an attack that was unprovoked, as the Dogman had turned and tried to run away from the much larger werewolf, but after a fairly long chase, the werewolf finally caught up and provoked the Dogman into a fight, and once he had him down, he started to leave and slipped and he saw the werewolf look his way and stayed on top of the Dogman, and he guessed finished killing it as great howls of excitement went up moments later, like cheers from champions winning streak. He was not certain that he was being followed, but he had a distinct feeling that he was and wanted to catch up and make sure that we were still moving and that we didn't have time to rest. We needed to be headed toward the road. Said it was 4 hours till daylight and we were in danger if he caught up to us. I said I would kill him if he caught up to me and told him I better use all my energy traveling right now. Something in the back of my mind told me not to make a stand and go and take this fight up another day, so we moved out. The young one said he was going to double back and check how much distance we were ahead of him. I asked about what was your name. I'm sorry I never asked. He replied, I'm Justin. I told him to be safe and catch up soon. And be careful. He nodded his head and he was gone into the night in one direction and myself and the females in another. We were traveling maybe an hour and the females' ears went up like they were shot out of a cannon from their body twisting in directions from which we had just come. And I said loudly, what's wrong? And Nicole said, it has him. He's on the ground. I told them I had to go back for him and they both said that it would be no use for any of us to go back now. It would be over before any of us could get back to him. I said, what if he only wounds him like he did me? And Nicole said he will not make that mistake again. You are the reason he is now on this killing spree because you lived. He will make sure that anything he comes up against will die. I told them that this is the reason I must return. He will start to hunt humans, and I can't have that happen. I came here after a Dogman, but I must stop the werewolf before I leave. I explained that I needed medical help and I was within miles of being able to get it, and that what Justin would want, he came out of the program and believed in what he had been taught in the release to hunt the wild game, and when was gone, move on and find more. Courtney was born wild, and we found her wandering. She joined us, our ways of the breeding program. She still has wild traits to come out from time to time, but mostly she is on track with it. I then asked them if they wanted to come back to Virginia with me, and Nicole said yes, she would, and Courtney said she would think about it until we got to the road and was wondering what people were going to think when we went back into town with them. I said I would take care of that. That would be my problem. Just come back with us. At the time, the moment their ears twitched again, they both looked in the direction one more time. After a couple of moments of silence, we needed to go fast as we could. We turned, moved out. Every once in a while, one of them would look back. You could actually see the sadness in their face. We had traveled another hour and a half now, and you could see just a hint of daylight. I stopped and pulled out the radio to make the call. I'm able to raise the office, and Lisa's in the office. She hears my voice on the radio and wants to know if I'm ready for pickup. I explain I'm injured and need a patrol car ASAP. I'm on the north side and I will be at the road in an hour. Lisa replies back she is on her way for pickup, and I explain I need the best marksman also. I need them now, and to bring him and 3 more deputies with long guns. The sheriff comes on the radio and says they will be waiting on me, and I give them a rough idea of where I should come out. They're on their way. Courtney says she's going back to check on Justin to make sure of his condition. Nicole starts on her. You heard the same thing I did, you know he's gone, but Courtney says there is still a chance. She answered, yes, but you know he's coming after us, so you need to swing wide to one side or another to miss him. They looked at each other and we all parted ways. She came up to me and said, thank you. I told her to hurry back with Justin or without, I would get her out of here. We then did part ways, moving fast. I could just make out the road in the distance. I could see a car going down the road now. We both looked at each other and kept going. And then I heard it, just like Nicole did, a horrific scream from behind and a roar like nothing I'd ever heard in my 5 years on the job. I was 300 yards from the road and Nicole only looked at me and took off and was gone. And I see her friend Courtney and her Lisa on the other squad car pulling up. Lisa and the other officer ran out to help me. We were like 15 yards and another horrific scream from behind me. And all I could... She was... No, and there was a marksman. He's right there. I ask him to arm himself, and he says he is, and he stands there with the three of us. We move up from the trunk of Lisa's car and peer out across the field. I ask if he sees it. He replies that he does. I tell him to shoot it in the head and leave it where he kills it. He gets it in his crosshairs and starts to say, "What the fuck is that thing?" I say, "Don't ask questions, just do what you're told." He let it get within 200 yards and fired the first round of his .308 Norma Magnum, and it rolled up like it had fallen off a tightrope. We were all watching it, and it actually tried to push itself up one more time, and just as it got to the top of its push, his rifle rolled again, the creature lurked back, and its head looked like it went into a million pieces. I started to walk out there, and Lisa said, "Let it lie. No one from the road would notice it that far out, and he better not say a word about what had just taken place. For him to return to headquarters, do his paperwork, and only give it to her if he wanted to remain on the force." She then took me to the county hospital, told them that I had been attacked by a bear up on the mountain, and they cleaned my wound, stitched my neck, back, right leg. I remained in the hospital for the next 4 days. After talking with my wife, she and myself decided that she would not come out from Georgia, because money was tight. After 4 days were up, I had Lisa resupply me and had her drop me off at the north end to retrace my steps. Of course, the large werewolf had its head shot off by someone other than me. Nicole, when I found her body, she was missing her head. I never found it. Then I also found Courtney's body the same day, and she was torn into 2 separate pieces. I then camped overnight. And Lord, was it pretty with all the stars shining. I rose the early next morning, found Justin. He was in many pieces, like he had been tortured, his hands torn from his arms, his feet torn from his legs. I don't know why he would try to protect anyone that much. It was something that I always meant to ask about, and never did, and now those people are gone. The Dogman vultures were feeding on, so I left it for them and called a pickup from my friend Lisa. We went to every motel in the county, also every bed and breakfast, couldn't find a room. Finally, I asked if there were any open cells in the jail, and she asked why. I said I'm sure the sheriff would mind if I borrow one for the night. She says okay. We start to drive down there. She starts to pass a small house out in the woods. I ask who lives there. She says it's her place. I'm spending the night there. So I climb into bed and sleep. Boy, did I ever sleep great. This is before the nightmares have taken a hold of me. Later that day, she takes me back to the office. I catch the flight back to Virginia, turn in my paperwork, find out even though the Dogman was dead and the werewolf is dead, that I get a failed hunt on both, as I killed neither one of the creatures myself, and that's how 2 female werewolves put their bodies together on different nights to keep me warm to save my life. And that is the very first hunt that Victor ever shared with me, or us. He had talked about other hunts, but that was the first hunt he officially shared. Of course, there was a lot of people calling BS on it because werewolves talking. But yet, there are other people, other narrators, not even narrators. I'm not even a narrator. I'm a researcher who has a channel that likes to share stories and talk about other stuff. So, but there's other channels that have talking werewolves and dogmen in Compton and people that survive crazy mishaps and still live even though no one ever heard of it and this and that. So I don't know why people just like to critique my channel. I will always stick up for Victor. He has never, as far as I know, lied to me. And like John, TJ, and Hunter said, I mean, they vetted him. I vetted him before they even did. I mean, they really, I don't know. But anyway, that is the story. Someday, in a couple of days maybe, I'll do an upload of why I trust and believe in Victor so much, and then you guys will be able to see why I do and weigh your options. I know the majority of you do love Victor, but there are those few on Reddit and a couple other little channels that do not, and that's on them, you know. That's on them. I won't say anything bad about people. It bothers me, but oh well. People are people. Have a great night, guys. And with that, farewell and see ya!